I were talking about how much. The Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. Again, that's documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement. Today's hearing marks the second in a series of hearings this subcommittee is holding in preparation for the Water Resources Development Act of 2024. This past week, we heard from Assistant Secretary Connor and General Spellman regarding the administration's priorities for WARDA 2024. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from stakeholders from across the nation who will testify to the importance of Army Corps Civil Works programs and maintaining a consistent 2-year WARDA schedule. WARDA is one of the most important pieces of legislation we work to draft and pass here in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and we are proud to do so regularly. Every 2 years since 2014, Congress has passed a bipartisan consensus WARDA bill into law, helping communities across the country. I look forward to working once again with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to continue the important work and tradition of passing this bill every 2 years. As I mentioned at last week's hearing, WARDA is a critical legislative vehicle to meet the water resources needs in our communities nationwide. Reliable water navigation systems allow for the safe and efficient shipping of cargo, fueling our economy. Levees protect homes and businesses from flooding. Dams also provide flood control for communities, along with power and opportunities for recreation. Of particular importance to my constituents on the coast in North Carolina's 7th Congressional District, coastal restoration and nourishment projects mitigate erosion and damage from frequent coastal storms. WARDA 2020 reauthorized the coastal storm risk management projects in Wrightsville Beach and Carolina Beach, allowing these to continue to receive renourishment. As sand naturally shifts over time, these coastal communities rely on a predictable renourishment cycle to ensure they can withstand storms. WARDA 2022 also provided authorization for investment in other erosion mitigation efforts, such as the shoreline and riverine restoration in Southport, North Carolina, which will bolster the riverbank's resilience against damage from storms and vessel traffic. To enhance flood mitigation efforts, it's important to have a clear understanding of the need. As such, the 2022 WARDA also authorized the National Coastal Mapping Program in North Carolina, which will map inland and coastal waterways to identify factors that increase flood risk. I was pleased to see funding included in the 2024 Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, and that is if we ever have an appropriations package that passes Congress and gets signed into law. Let's hope that we do. My ranking member says we will, so I take her word on it. I was also pleased to continue support of the Wilmington Harbor Deepening Project as authorized in WARDA 2020 to allow the Port of Wilmington to meet increasing demand. All of these efforts are critical parts of keeping Americans safe and allowing our nation's economy to thrive, which is exactly what this legislation enables. An important part of the WARDA process is the partnership between the federal government, non-federal partners, and stakeholders who come together to solve local resource needs. So I'm glad to see today that we have a panel of witnesses made up of diverse interests in geographic areas. This panel can speak to water resource challenges as well as to solutions that these WARDAs can provide. We look forward to hearing from each of you here today on the importance of this legislation in assisting with flood control, inland waterway navigation, coastal restoration, beach renourishment, and ensuring safe movement of goods through maritime transportation. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to each of you, but in particular to a friend and constituent of mine, Mayor Teresa Batts of Surf City, North Carolina, with whom my staff and I have done a tremendous amount of work through the years as it relates to the needs of Surf City and the coastal area there. With that, I yield back and recognize my ranking member, Ms. Napolitano, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, my great friend, Mr. Chairman Rouser, for holding today's meeting. Through biennial enactment of Water Resources Development Act, WRDA, this committee is addressing water-related needs of our states and local communities. WRDAs are a shining example of how Congress can efficiently and effectively meet the bipartisan needs of our communities when we decide it is best to work together than apart. Again, I look forward to continuing my relationship and partnership with you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Graves, and Ranking Member Larson to get it done. Mr. Chairman, each of our communities experience unique water resources challenges. We seek to address these challenges through predictable enactment of WRDAs, providing the Corps with the tools and funding necessary to address community needs. As stressors or local priorities change over time, this committee has stayed vigilant to ensure that the Corps has the authority and resources necessary to address local needs. The history of the Corps bears it out. The Corps' Civil Works responsibility was initially focused primarily on navigation, developing the coastal and inland harbors necessary for the efficient movement of goods to our then great young nation. That responsibility was later expanded to incorporate large-scale flood control, in part due to widespread flooding along the Mississippi River that devastated communities and livelihoods. More recently, as more and more communities have come to realize the economic, environmental, and public health benefits for restoring their environment, Congress expanded the Corps' responsibilities to include watershed and ecosystem restoration, benefits that can be seen in the Florida Everglades, coastal Louisiana, and the Great Lakes. Mr. Chairman, we have reached another one of those critical decision points, this time related to the Corps' role in addressing water supply and water conservation needs of the nation. Communities across the country are now facing similar water supply and water conservation challenges as we had long felt in the West. Cities and towns are coming to recognize the importance of water security for the health of their municipalities, their industry, their agriculture, and their economies. Over the past decade, I have championed several provisions to enhance the authority and flexibility of the Corps to address local water supply, water conservation needs, while balancing these efforts with the other authorized purposes of the Corps. Yet, despite these legislative efforts, the Corps and the Office of Management and Budget continue to believe that water supply and water conservation are not a primary mission of the Corps, meaning that these objectives do not get the same attention and budgetary priority as the 3 other mission areas. Therefore, it is prudent that we rethink the Corps' role in helping communities face water insecurity, not to supplant the state and local efforts, but to support them. For months, staff and I have been working with stakeholders and members of Congress to elevate the water supply and water conservation mission of the Corps. My draft proposal, the, quote, Priority Water Supply and Conservation Act, close quote, which I ask unanimous consent to include as part of today's hearing record,
Without objection.
would direct the Corps to give equal budgetary and policy priority to water supply and water conservation elements of Corps projects that are authorized by Congress. To be clear, my proposal does not automatically add water supply or water conservation to the existing projects, nor would it put a finger on the scale to prioritize water supply or water conservation over other existing authorized projects purposes, nor would it affect existing national policy that recognizes that the state and local interests have primary responsibilities in developing local water supplies. My proposal simply eliminates any artificial barriers being used by the ROMB to exclude from consideration-worthy water supply and conservation projects authorized by Congress that have also have substantial state and local support. Mr. Chairman, as we develop a new water bill for 2024, that legislation should recognize the increased role the courts is playing and will continue to play in addressing the municipal, industrial, and agricultural water needs of our communities and constituency. I look forward to working with you on this proposal in our continued partnership to develop another successful ward of this Congress. So let's get to work, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I have a couple of documents to enter into the record myself. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from Associated Builders and Contractors dated December 13, 2023, outlining WARDA priorities. I also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Maritime Coalition dated December 13, 2023, also outlining WARDA priorities. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize, my great pleasure to recognize, the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Graves, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. This is our second hearing in preparation for the committee writing and passing our sixth consecutive bipartisan Water Resources Development Act since 2014 at least. So ensuring that effective and reliable water infrastructure is vital to American families, to our businesses, to farms, and the economic development of our country. And my district is bordered by both two of the largest rivers in the United States. On one side, the Missouri River, and on the other side, the Mississippi rivers. And that's why a major priority of mine is ensuring that our river navigation infrastructure on the Mississippi and Missouri and the rest of the nation's waterways, for that matter, that they get the investment that they desperately need. In addition, we have to prioritize flood control. A little too much rainfall and too little focus on flood control can lead to disastrous results for people who live and work along our nation's waterways. And we learned that lesson the hard way in '93, in 2011, and again in 2019 when flooding along the Missouri and Mississippi rivers devastated communities all across my district. And I've been long concerned that the current river management incorrectly prioritizes fish and wildlife over the protection of people and property. And that's led to many of our tax dollars being wasted on supersized science experiments instead of being responsibly invested in restoring levees and increasing flood resilience. Addressing that is going to be a top priority of mine throughout the development of WARDA 2024. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for holding the second hearing on the development of the Water Resources Development Act. In the Pacific Northwest, and including across the entire country, businesses and communities understand the critical importance of ports, harbors, and inland waterways to keep goods that we rely on moving, protecting homes from flood damage, and preserving our ecosystems. And since 2014, this committee has honored its commitment to meet local water resource needs around the country carried out by the Army Corps through regular enactment of bipartisan WRDAs. WRDAs support projects that address local water resource challenges to create jobs in construction and support industries and businesses that benefit directly from core projects. Regular, predictable enactment of WRDA also allows for the implementation of critical and timely policy reforms that improve the function and flexibility of the Corps to respond to local water resource challenges. WRDA 2022 is a blueprint for future WRDAs. It successfully authorized the construction of 25 new projects covering each facet of the Corps missions, as well as almost 100 new feasibility studies for future water resource development projects. WRDA 22 also authorized a historic total of more than $6.5 billion in environmental infrastructure assistance for community-driven projects, including $200 million for locally supported water and wastewater infrastructure projects in my home state of Washington. These federal, state, and local partnerships are critical to help address the growing water and wastewater infrastructure needs throughout the country. WRDA 24 is our opportunity to build on the bipartisan successes of the last few bills. We can continue to advance efforts to expand America's navigational capacity and strengthen its supply chains through port, harbor, and inland waterways development. We can continue to authorize job-creating investments that simultaneously address the water resource challenges facing our communities and support national, regional, and local economies. And we can continue to prepare our communities for the challenges that the climate crisis poses, as well as what extreme weather events impose upon us. And we can continue to promote equity for all communities by ensuring access to the core technical and planning expertise, as well as by increasing the coordination between the core and tribal, minority, and disadvantaged communities. Beyond regular enactment of WRDAs, Congress also needs to provide sufficient funding to the Corps for project planning, construction, and operation and maintenance so communities can quickly realize the benefits of water resource improvements. The $17 billion down payment made through the bipartisan infrastructure law is a great start, but Congress needs to continue to sustain robust investment in our water infrastructure into the future. So I look forward to the continued partnership with Chair Graves, Chair Rouser, and Ranking Member Napolitano as we develop the new bipartisan WRDA 24. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. I will identify each. Mr. Shane Kinney, Executive Director of the Coalition to Protect the Missouri River. Mayor Teresa Batts of Surf City, North Carolina. Mr. Jim Weekly, President of Lake Carriers Association. Mr. Paul Anderson, President and CEO of Port Tampa Bay. Mr. Dave Mitamura, Executive Director of the National Water Supply Alliance. I want to briefly take a moment to explain the lighting system, which is fairly self-explanatory. Green means go, yellow means you got a little time left, and red means wrap it up as quickly as possible. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. I'd now like to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Graves, to introduce Mr. Kinney.
So thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to take just a moment to go in a little bit more depth on Shane Kinney. He's the Executive Director, as was pointed out, of the Missouri Coalition to Protect the Missouri River, and I want to thank him for being here today. The Coalition to Protect the Missouri River has been at the forefront of the fight to ensure that the river is responsibly managed and that we get back to the original intent of this system, and that's navigation and flood control. While balancing, and at the same time balancing the other needs, which do include water supplies and include science-based recovery of some endangered species. But I've been proud to work with Shane on these efforts, both in his current role with the Coalition and also through his work with the Missouri Corn Growers Association, helping farmers navigate the aftermath of the 2011 flood. And I want to thank Shane again for your work and for making the trip out here to testify today. And I look forward to the testimonies. And with that, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Mr. Kinney, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman, members of the committee, and ranking members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding WRDA 2024 and its importance for the Missouri River and our stakeholders. As mentioned, my name is Shane Kinney. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition to Protect the Missouri River. CPMR was established in 2001 and is made up of more than 30 members across 6 states in the Midwest region. And we support, as the chairman indicated, responsible management of the Missouri River resources, as well as maintenance and enhancement of the congressionally authorized purposes of the river, including flood control, navigation, and water supply. We also support, as is indicated, science-based habitat restoration for endangered or threatened species, provided that those management actions keep human interests and our members' interests in mind and properly balanced. We're here at a very important time when it comes to the Missouri River and Missouri River management. While there are challenges that I will discuss, we have a much momentum on the Missouri River as well in regards to flood control and to navigation. Much of this is due to recently passed WRDA bills and generational authorizations of projects and studies that were included in those WRDA bills. And if those studies and projects are properly executed, it will have a long-term impact on the Missouri River and our region. In order for us, though, to continue to capitalize on that momentum and the excitement we have going on the Missouri River, it is critical that Congress continues to pass WRDA bills on time and every 2 years, as that's what we need to capture that momentum and take action. The historic flood of 2019 caused billions of dollars in flood damages throughout Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri, with much of those damages in Missouri's 6th district, as the chairman indicated. WRDA 2020 authorized the Lower Missouri River Flood Resiliency Study, which is allowing our region to take a new look at flood control along the Missouri River. This study is going to focus on local solutions and increase resiliency of flood control on the Missouri River. As part of this study, it's critical that stakeholders begin to see progress as soon as possible, which is why passing a WRDA bill in 2024 is absolutely critical so we can take action on solutions that we already have agreement on moving forward. In addition, between disaster funding from 2019 and the 2022 bipartisan infrastructure law, over $469 million is being invested in the Missouri River Navigation Channel. We're only halfway through this investment in this project, and it's already having a staggering impact on the resiliency of the channel. Several navigators have shared with me recently that they were able to move boats during the past 2 years of low water when they wouldn't have been able to in previous years without this work and rock placement. Along with the success, WRDA 2020 also authorized a Missouri River Navigation Resiliency Study that's allowing us to take a fresh look at a broad range of factors that could improve resiliency of navigation on the river. The timing of this study, along with the federal investment that I just mentioned, is absolutely critical to gain momentum for shipping on the river. Commercial traffic is increasing on the river to levels we haven't seen in decades. With the Port of Blencoe at Blencoe, Iowa, opening in 2001 with New Cooperative of Iowa, they've had 3 successful navigation seasons north of Omaha, Nebraska. Prior to opening this port, New Co-op transported fertilizer up the Mississippi River and across the state of Iowa via truck, and now they're able to move fertilizer all the way up the Missouri River to their northwest Iowa locations. This has saved them roughly 250,000 truck miles every year the last 3 years off the roads, which shows the significance of the impact of being able to move product on barge. In addition to moving fertilizer up, they're able to move corn, soybean meal, distillers grains, and scrap iron back south, being able to use both directions of the river. Passing a WRDA bill in 2024 is critical to leveraging this success that we're experiencing now into long-term resiliency. Not just resiliency of the Missouri River, but also of the Mississippi River as well. Flows from the Missouri River are critical to shipping on the middle Mississippi River and between St. Louis and Cairo, Illinois, and this just highlights the national importance of movement on the Missouri River and flows on the Missouri River, especially right now as we see those low flows. We as CPMR has shaped our priorities to promote continued progress in all these areas, and they include shifting the previously mentioned navigation resiliency study from a 50-50 cost share to a 75-25 cost share due to its national impact, its regional impact, and to ensure that this study is completed on time and gives local stakeholders the confidence of that long-term resiliency while maintaining important stakeholder buy-in. Shipping reliability and cost share will shift, but maintaining that input. Bank erosion continues to be an issue as well, and those are also included in our priorities. These are just a few of our priorities. We will submit our full list to the committee. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Missouri River Day and its impact regionally and nationally, and we'll look forward to this committee's work on WRDA 2024.
Ms. Batts, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, Chairman Graves, and Ranking Member Larson, it is an honor and a privilege to testify before this distinguished subcommittee today to discuss the Town of Surf City's Federal Coastal Storm Risk Project. My name is Teresa Batts, and I am the Mayor of Surf City, North Carolina. Passing the Waters Resource Development Act, or WRDA, on a biannual basis has provided the nation's coastal engineering community with a reliability and certainty that it needs to advance critical resilience projects like the one at Surf City. The town supports the development of WRDA 2024. We acknowledge the tremendous bipartisan track record of this important infrastructure bill. Thank you for your leadership and commitment to authorizing process. I would also like to acknowledge Chairman Rouser, an ardent champion for the U.S. coastal resilience and for the North Carolina beach communities. Thank you for your support and highlighting our water needs. Chairman Rouser, you have visited Surf City numerous times. I'm certain you remember meeting myself and members of council following Hurricane Florence and recall the damage it caused in our communities. These photos give you a sense of extreme vulnerability that Surf City faces. They are taken post-Florence and illustrate the consequences of not having adequate beach and dune infrastructure in place. As Chairman Rouser mentioned last week, our federal nourishment project is long overdue. The town of Surf City is located in the heart of Topsail Island, North Carolina, and it serves as the economic engine for the surrounding island and inland communities. Our residents and property owners have strong ties to the coastal environment, representing commercial and recreational fishermen, a thriving agriculture industry, as well as retail, restaurants, and other businesses. A majority of households make between $50,000 to $150,000 per year. These are people that work in our schools, support the tourism sector, and work in construction. Please consider an open invitation to visit Surf City. Beaches and dunes are a proven form of natural infrastructure. They protect coastal communities like Surf City from flooding, ensuring local businesses are still running after a storm, and that coastal residents can return to their homes quickly with few repairs. Proactively investing in wide beaches and high vegetated dunes save the federal government money by reducing post-disaster recovery payments. Storm risk management is not the only reason to invest in coastal infrastructure projects. Beaches are economic engines, dominating 66% of U.S. tourism market. Surf City, for example, offers an affordable working-class vacation to the American people. Tourists will stop coming to the beaches if they go away. Beaches create jobs too. Nationally, the ocean-based tourism sector employs more Americans than the entire real estate industry, as well as more people than telecommunications and building constructions combined. Surf City's economy is entirely dependent on the beach. The town of Surf City requires authorization of our coastal storm risk management project in WRDA 2024. As Chairman Rouser explained in last week's hearing, despite initial authorization in WRDA 2014, the town has yet to see construction of the federal beach project. As the photos shown 13 years ago, without a project has led to the increased vulnerability and reduced protection. Delays in the project have led to loss of millions of federal, state, and local tax dollars due to price escalation and dredging costs. The town has also invested significantly dollars in erosion mitigation, including $14 million in a sand truck haul project to shore up the disappearing beach. When the town learned that the construction funding for this project through the Disaster Recovery Act in 2019, we immediately engaged with the Wilmington District and the South Atlantic Division, who have been wonderful partners throughout this long process. Because North Topsail Beach withdrew their project in 2024, we need authorization for Surf City only project in the DRA 19 funds. Currently, investigation funds that will lead to the construction are awaiting approval. Surf City has been prepared to sign a project partner agreement to see this project to construction since day one. The town faithfully procured land to increase our public parking and access to the beach. We have secured over 86% of our necessary easements and dedicated to obtaining 100%. In closing, Surf City is grateful to the subcommittee and Congress for ensuring this critical missions with the Army Corps of Engineers. The federal project will provide not only our first large-scale nourishment project, but will also serve as a longer-term solution to maintaining our beaches that our residents and visitors both cherish and respect gratefully. As shown today, we are in desperate need of new authorization for a Surf City-only project, which can only happen through WRDA process. The town of Surf City supports timely passage of WRDA 2024 and respectfully requests the subcommittee's support to include this project. Thank you for your opportunity to testify today.
Mr. Weekly.
Thank you. Since 1880, Lake Cairns Association represented U.S. flagged ships moving 90 million tons of cargo annually. They are the building blocks of America: iron ore, construction stone, coal, cement, grain, salt, and sand. Our economy and our national security need a resilient Great Lakes Navigation System, or GLNS. It is the most efficient and environmentally sustainable mode. Our Jones Act qualified vessels can move a ton of cargo 600 miles on 1 gallon of fuel. One of our 1,000-foot-long ships carries 70,000 tons, the equivalent of 40 river barges, 700 rail cars, or 2,800 trucks. With our efficiency, trucks could use lawnmower engines. The Corps estimates our transportation rate savings at $3.9 billion. The industry drives $36 billion in economic activity, generates $6 billion in tax revenue, and 147,350 U.S. jobs with more than $17.8 billion in wages annually. WRDA is the most important piece of legislation Americans have never heard of. It authorizes maritime infrastructure. Providing for the national defense and facilitating commerce are two basic functions of the federal government. WRDA accomplishes both. When I started at LCA, the GLNS was unsustainable. The Corps was not funded to remove the 3.3 million cubic yards of annual sedimentation clogging our navigational arteries in America's heartland. The backlog peaked at 18 million cubic yards. For every inch of navigational depth lost, our largest vessels lose 270 tons of cargo. U.S. Lakers light-loaded 3 of every 4 voyages, and vessels grounded in the navigation channel. The Corps was on a 400-year pace to recapitalize infrastructure. The locks in Michigan were poorly funded and less reliable. The new Soo lock was authorized in 1986 and languished on congressional life support. Multiple Congresses would not pass WRDA, and the system was in a death spiral. A Department of Homeland Security study estimated an unplanned closure of a single Soo lock would result in a recession and 11 million Americans unemployed. Twice, WRDA reauthorized the construction of a new Soo lock. It took multiple WRDAs to right the ship. Bills provided greater access to the industry-funded Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and its $10 billion surplus. WRDAs resuscitated the GLNS and placed it on a healthier diet of regular authorizations and more funding. I am a strong proponent of the 2-year WRDA cycle. It provides new opportunities, policy corrections, increased funding authorizations, and congressional guidance. It is simply good governance. I know the Great Lakes Navigation System may need further authorizations to address material management and to provide beneficial use opportunities. The 2-year WRDA cycle provides the needed flexibility for better stewardship of infrastructure, environmental resources, and precious tax dollars. I have 2 specific requests for WRDA 2024. The 5 Great Lakes connecting channels should be 100% federally funded, as are the Soo locks. These are system resources and should not require a non-federal sponsor. We need to fix Middle Nebish Channel in the St. Mary's River. It should only have 1 authorized depth, not 2. It is unusual. It is a safety hazard. Nothing separates the shallow and the deep sides. It is a problem navigating in the ice, particularly when the Coast Guard closes the downbound channel, forcing transits in the opposite direction. This channel's design creates a safety hazard. We don't need a study, we need action. First, deepen the turns. I support the 2-year WRDA cycle. It's good governance. WRDA's resurrected the Great Lakes Navigation System. We are asking for 2 small fixes: full federal funding of the connecting channels and fixing Middle Nebish Channel. We will be back, given the appropriate legislative pace, for additional requests. Please pass WRDA 2024. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah. Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, and members of the subcommittee. It is a pleasure to be here today, not only as the President and CEO of Port Tampa Bay, but also as a representative of America's vast network of ports and trade corridors. Thank you for your invitation. I'm speaking today in my dual role as Chairman of the American Association of Port Authorities and the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors. The Water Resources Development Act is a lifeline for our nation's economic and infrastructural progress. The biennial rhythm of WRDA is vital for the sustenance and growth of trade commerce across our great nation. This consistent cycle allows us at Port Tampa Bay and others like us to plan, develop, and execute projects critical to our nation's economic security and growth. Port Tampa Bay, as Florida's largest port, is a cornerstone in the state supply chain, yet our influence extends far beyond state lines. The proposed deepening of our 47-mile-long shipping channel, a project awaiting August Chief's report from the Army Corps of Engineers, will upgrade national supply chain infrastructure, a strategic move that will reduce congestion in out-of-state ports and a commitment to enhancing the efficiency of national logistics. We understand the August timetable does not quite align with the House and Senate consideration of WRDA, but we hope Congress will include the authority to construct this project and any final legislation. The deepening of Tampa Harbor will generate average annual transportation benefits of $88.5 million for our nation, according to the Army Corps feasibility study. This project, however, hinges only on the timely progression of the WRDA cycle. Nearly 70% of the 20 million cubic yards of the material dredged as part of our deepening will be reused as a number of sites, including restoration of Egmont Key, a national and historic treasure. Now let me speak to the significance of this legislation has on the American Association of Port Authorities. AAPA is the unified voice of the seaport industry in the Americas, and my testimony is given on behalf of state and local public agencies located in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Gulf Coast, the Great Lakes, and in Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. For more than a century, AAPA membership has empowered port authorities to serve global customers and create economic and social value for their communities. Our nation's seaports deliver vital goods to consumers, facilitate the export of America's made goods, creates jobs, and supports local and national economic growth. Ports also play a crucial role in our national defense, a point acknowledged through the designation of 18 of our nation's commercial ports as strategic seaports as designated by the Department of Defense. The total economic value generated in terms of revenue to the businesses, personal income, and the economic output at U.S. coastal ports accounted for $5.4 trillion, roughly 26% of our nation's GDP. This research also showed over 30.8 million Americans are employed in jobs generated as a result. The Water Resources Development Act is a key piece of legislation that provides essential authority for water infrastructure projects across our nation. WRDA provides authority for the Army Corps of Engineers to carry our projects related to flood control, navigation, and environmental restoration. WRDA plays a critical role in protecting our environment and our natural resources. It provides authority for projects to restore wetlands, protect endangered species, and improve water quality. Congress must continue to support this legislation and provide the necessary funding and authority to carry out these important projects. It is critical to U.S. ports and U.S. exporter competitiveness that Congress continue enacting WRDA legislation every 2 years. It is my request that a bipartisan effort be made to ensure timely passage of WRDA not just for the benefit of our port at Port Tampa Bay, but for every port, every state, and every citizen who relies on the seamless flow of goods and services that our ports facilitate. Thank you for your time today, your consideration, and your pivotal role in the shaping of the future of our nation's trade and infrastructure. Thank you.
Mr. Minamura.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss stakeholder priorities for WRDA 2024. Thank you also for your commitment to maintaining the biennial bipartisan WRDA process, which is crucial to maintaining and improving our nation's water infrastructure. My name is Dave Mitamura, and I serve as the Executive Director of the National Water Supply Alliance. NWA is a national, not-for-profit organization representing water supply providers across the country who work every day to meet the nation's growing water supply needs. Our members have a direct and substantial interest in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers water supply program, or depend upon storage space in core reservoirs to meet the needs of the communities they serve. Our members advocate for the preservation and enhancement of the nation's water supply, protect traditional state authorities, and ensure that water supply interests share equitably in the benefits of multipurpose reservoir projects. I personally have worked either with or for the Corps for over 20 years. Throughout my career, and especially in my role at NWSA, I've seen firsthand the value that comes from open communication and direct engagement with the leadership and staff at the Corps. Under the leadership of Lieutenant General Scott Spellman, the Corps has developed a strong working relationship with us. A dedicated Corps water supply team regularly attends NWSA meetings, actively participating in candid debates and collaborative discussions as we work to refine and improve the Corps program. We appreciate this transparency and collaboration, but more can be done. Our nation faces significant and evolving water supply challenges. Our infrastructure is aging, our populations are growing, and we are experiencing droughts of increasing severity, frequency, and duration. Additional priority and resources dedicated to water supply are desperately needed and overdue. NWSA believes that with a few tweaks, the Corps can be better equipped to bolster its water supply efforts in support of regional, state, and local partners. This subcommittee is well informed on the expanse of the Corps water supply portfolio. I won't belabor the statistics. My written testimony includes several data points on the Corps' impact on water supply. They are significant and meaningful. Under the current and mounting challenges facing water supply in the U.S., the Corps water supply program can and should play a more active and significant role in addressing the needs of the nation. Yet still, water supply remains a relatively low priority within the Corps. The Corps water supply program receives only a tiny fraction of the budget and staff as compared to other mission areas. As a result, water supply studies take many years, even decades, to complete. Some studies never even make the cut due to the lack of priority. I have provided examples of this lack of focus in my written testimony. NWSA recommends that the subcommittee consider ways to increase the priority given to water supply within the Corps so the emphasis is more commensurate with its importance to the nation. Put plainly, agencies focus on the missions prescribed to them by Congress. NWSA also recommends that the subcommittee seek new ways for state and local partners to collaborate with the Corps. For example, allowing studies led by non-federal partners, optimizing storage for water supply as appropriate, and modernizing operations to adapt, such as water conservation. Given our nation's water supply needs, we cannot wait decades to take water supply studies from authorization to completion. And we certainly cannot deny opportunities to start such studies. We must find ways to prioritize water supply and to evaluate needs and implement solutions more quickly if we are to meet the challenges to come. Thank you, Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, and members of the subcommittee for your hard work developing the nation's water resources infrastructure. NWSA looks forward to working with the subcommittee as it develops WRDA 2024.
Well, thank you all for your testimony. I want to take a moment to welcome our newest member of the subcommittee, Ms. Celeste Malloy, representing Utah's 2nd Congressional District. Welcome, Celeste. Glad that you're here, and look forward to having you on this subcommittee. We now turn to questions for the panel. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mayor Batts, you talked a great deal in your testimony about the situation there at Surf City. Can you give a little bit of a history of the challenges that you have faced because you've not gotten the renourishment dollars that you need? For example, other things that need to be tended to that from a city perspective or town perspective that you've not been able to do, those type of items. I think the subcommittee would be interested to learn.
Thank you. So as far as things that we haven't been able to do is moving forward with giving the residents the health, safety, and welfare of having an established dune line, protecting our infrastructure, which is our water and our sewer, our roads that lead to, that are oceanfront, and protect our, not only our oceanfront homes, but all the homes behind it as well. We have spent $14 million in tax dollars after Hurricane Florence with a truck haul to temporarily shore up our beach, disappearing beach. We are in desperate need of this new authorization for a Surf City only project. The town requires authorization of our coastal storm risk management project in WRDA 2024.
Well, we will obviously continue to work on this. I know how critically important it is. I remember Hurricane Florence very, very well of 2018. I remember Hurricane Matthew quite well from 2016. And it really does a significant amount of damage. Mitigation efforts are incredibly important in terms of preventing property loss, helps to mitigate costs for the National Flood Insurance Program, et cetera, et cetera. So it has a real domino effect. Mr. Anderson, I'm going to switch to you quickly. Supply chain infrastructure. Infrastructure is so critically important to the supply chain. Can you talk about the need for a robust supply chain, especially after the disruptions that took place with COVID-19 and the nexus with WRDA projects?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Critically important to our nation is supply chain connectivity, freight corridors, connecting our gateway ports to the hinterland cargo movement. It's also vitally important, as I mentioned in my comments, that, and as most of the testimony today, for having a predictable WRDA cycle that allows ports, in our case ports, but other water-related projects, to be able to make the investments and align those with other investments that create freight capacity, freight velocity, and expansion for our nation's ports. The most recent supply chain crisis was, most people agree it was COVID. The demand went up. It exceeded our capacity. There were some other issues. I think it's also up to the beneficial cargo owners to diversify their supply chains and use other ports. And we have seen that happen in the Gulf. Gulf ports have seen cargo move from West Coast ports as some of the companies are diversifying. So aligning the WARDA investments with strategic investments into our freight corridors, as well as diversifying the supply chain, are critical to preventing supply chain issues that we've seen recently.
Mr. Weekly, you talked a good little bit about the Great Lakes and their importance to our economy and security, and specific, the 100% federal, or at least the idea that it ought to be 100% federally allocated. Can you elaborate a little more on that, why that particular point in particular?
Yes, sir. To be clear, I'm not talking about all the navigational channels, just those 5 that we consider systems resources or connecting channels. They connect our different lakes, Lake Superior to Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, and Lake Huron to Lake Erie. So WRDA 2014, the wisdom of this subcommittee, designated the Great Lakes for the first time in history as a navigational system. Before that, we were just a series of independent ports. So I think it's consistent with the system-wide approach. It's also consistent with the way that Sioux Locks are treating as a system asset. There's not a non-federal sponsor for that project, sir.
Very good, thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mitamora, how would the elevation of water supply and water conservation added to the 3 primary mission areas of the Corps be helpful in advancing authorized projects to address local water scarcity issues?
First of all, Ms. Ranking Member Napolitano, thank you for your focus on water supply. And NWSA appreciates your leadership. As I said in my remarks, the time required to complete and implement water supply studies and projects is a chronic challenge. One made even more important based on the nation's rapidly evolving water supply needs. These delays often result from a lack of resources and attention allocated to water supply. We believe the proposed legislation would help to elevate the priority given to water within the Corps, encourage flexibility inside the agency when it comes to water supply projects and studies, and help make additional resources available to Corps staff so they can move water supply projects from study to implementation more quickly. Ultimately, we think this becomes a way for the Corps to find a way to say yes when working on the water supply issues that are so critical to our nation.
Yes, sir. Would this draft proposal preserve the primary responsibility of states and local interests in managing local water supply concerns?
Yes, it would. State and local interests should always retain primary responsibility for meeting water supply needs. The proposed legislation would not affect that. Instead, it would help produce additional tools and resources available to the Corps. So the Corps can cooperate with state and local interests in these important efforts, consistent with longstanding congressional policy, as stated in the Water Supply Act of 1958. The legislation is also very clear that it does not alter or affect traditional state authorities to regulate the use and allocation of water, something that is extremely important to NWSA's members.
Thank you. And to the rest of you, thank you for your support of WRDA. I yield back.
Let's see. Mr. Webster, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this important meeting. Everybody loves ports. Everybody loves WRDA. So thank you for doing that. My question is for Paul Anderson. As you know, the Army Corps is working on a general reevaluation of the port for deepening Tampa Bay's shipping channels. And channel deepening project would allow ports to accommodate larger next generation ships. It's become sort of the industry standard. Can you elaborate on how the importance of channel deepening projects in Port of Tampa, as well as the greater area of Florida, will benefit from these services?
Yeah, Congressman, the deepening project at Port Tampa Bay is vitally important to be able to, just like we talked about the cycle of WARDA being 2 years, having predictability for funding, we have to be able to anticipate, which we know is coming, larger ships into the Gulf of Mexico that will be Asian services in particular coming through the Panama Canal. We have seen those increase over time. The other Gulf ports are deepening as well and have deepened. So this will allow us to be able to handle the larger vessels that we anticipate and know that are coming in the future. It creates a more efficient transportation system, creates more volume that we can serve the incredibly growing market, in particular of the Central Florida and Florida area that we're seeing significant population growth. And it allows us to work with our customers to be more efficient, drive costs down, and create economic value for the citizens of our state and our nation.
Can you maybe discuss the importance of timing, these close timing relationships to the Army Corps and their chief's report and all that can happen from that? Could you give me a little breakdown on that?
Yes, sir. As I mentioned in my testimony, members of the subcommittee, we have a chief's report in August of 2024. It's going to be very close to any timing of WARDA passage, and it's really critical that we get that included in the next WARDA so that we can continue that predictability for the incredible growth, as I mentioned, and getting that in the next WARDA bill. So the timing's going to be a little tricky, and one of my specific asks that we, as the subcommittee, the committee, get that included in next year's WARDA.
Yield back.
Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Rouser and Ranking Member Ms. Napolitano for convening today's hearing. In South Florida, water is woven into the fabric of our daily existence, from the essential natural drinking water that residents rely on, the sunny beaches that millions enjoy every year, to the surrounding waters that shape our environment and ecosystem. There is no question about the need to safeguard our water and enhance our water infrastructure. That's why in my community, we are working to address the critical needs of the Everglades, identifying the need to replace hundreds of thousands of septic tanks that are polluting communities, protecting our neighbors from storm surges, and improving our ports so that we remain competitive in the global maritime industry. Through federal, state, and local collaboration, we strive to improve our water infrastructure and better utilize our water resources. We can accomplish this by passing the Water Resources Development Act of 2024. While making these financial commitments, it is imperative that we also work with our environmental stakeholders to ensure that our decisions will help heal environmental shortfalls of the past by building our future. I want to take a moment to also highlight the bipartisan nature of this bill. While our nation often witnesses a dysfunctional and partisan Congress, I'm proud that we are unified in our commitment to safeguard water resources because our water is precious and protecting it must be a priority. With that, I have a few questions for the witnesses. Mr. Mitamura, in South Florida, the Western Everglades Restoration Project has been repeatedly delayed. As a result, our local tribal communities are now facing challenges with excess water and agricultural pollutants. Can you elaborate on how state and local interests can work on delayed projects like the Western Everglades Restoration Project?
I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson, can you restate that question? I'm not sure what you're asking is related to water, as relates to water supply.
In your testimony, you stressed the importance of looking for new and creative mechanisms for state and local interests to collaborate with USACE to advance needed water resource projects.
Yes, that's correct. So one pushback we've received is that it would take away from the other interests in the core program. But what we're trying to do is elevate water supply to have equal footing. And ultimately, the Congress directs the Corps on how to parse those pieces. We are not trying to intrude or disrupt the programs that are already in existence and have great needs as well as water supply. So we don't see a negative impact to the other purposes, including ecosystem restoration.
Thank you. It is great to see another Floridian in the room, especially one who is the chair of the American Association of Port Authorities. When I first came to Congress, the Water Resource Development Act was not on a 2-year cycle, and my fellow Floridian Congressman Bill Posey and I launched the bipartisan Florida Ports Caucus to advocate for the restoration of the 2-year cycle. Can you elaborate on the significance of the 2-year Water Resource Development Act cycle, or WRDA, as opposed to a 1-year to address the issues?
Be happy to. Thank you for your warm welcome. And I want to, first of all, thank you for your leadership on our Florida Ports Caucus, and I'm looking forward to our next meeting this spring. The WRDA cycle, as we know it, and as this committee has promulgated successfully every 2 years, there was a period of time, Congresswoman, where we went 7 years at one point, I believe maybe 20 years ago, a 5-year cycle, and it's just not a way to do business for our nation's ports. I've mentioned it several times, but business people will tell you predictability is very important. Our ports will tell you. My colleague, Heidi, who runs as the great leader of the Port of Miami, we are very dependent on this committee and your authorization process for the projects that we're planning to expand our port capacity, to stay competitive in the global marketplace. And again, just one of the most important things the committee can do is have that predictability. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have, as a Californian, obviously great challenges with our water supply and our ability to enhance that supply, whether it's above ground storage or underground groundwater. So, Mr. Murrah, thank you for being here today and for your insight. An example down in Orange County with their water district and Army Corps, they're working on a Prado Dam implementation under Sigma. So they're trying to enhance that situation there and be able to have more storage, either groundwater or above ground. I, of course, have been a longtime advocate of building more surface water storage in the western states. In my own district, we have opportunities with what's called the Sites Reservoir in Northern California and the raise of the Shasta Dam, 18 feet, which feasibilities were being looked at just a few years ago. And also, the amount of water we're losing to the Pacific, or the opportunity on any given month with the rainfall and snowpack melts, we might be losing anywhere between 77 and 95% of the water flowing from the watershed might be going through the delta straight into the Pacific. And then somewhere else along the line, they want to try and convert that now salty water back into fresh water. Why don't we just catch it before it leaves? So, Mr. Midwinter, in addition to Army Corps, and we're working with Ms. Napolitano on looking at an idea on Army Corps' scope of work, maybe expanding the storage, so hope to work with her some more on that. What other federal agencies would have a role to play so we can accelerate groundwater recharge and storage projects? We lost some opportunity in this massive amount of rain and snow we had last year with the state water folks. We're not ready to allow us to divert water into retention and groundwater recharge ponds. We were waiting on permits in the middle of the massive water flows. So what ideas do you have, sir, on, besides Army Corps, who can we get to be more helpful?
Representative LaMalfa, thank you for the question. Your reference to Prado Dam is a good one. That's an example of where the Corps has approved operations to allow what is a flood control dam to capture water for groundwater recharge in certain cases. Ms. Napolitano's proposed legislation would hopefully allow that to be more widespread. I should also mention that our organization focuses on Corps of Engineers projects. So I'm not totally familiar with reclamation, but I would assume that those types of actions could be done at other federal reservoirs.
Okay. We talked, well, we were going to talk previously in another committee hearing on the 2014 WARDA, where there was a section 1043 pilot programs. There's two sections of it. Allow the non-federal project sponsor to carry out the feasibility studies of a project with the same standards as the Corps would. It was intended to evaluate the cost effectiveness and project delivery efficiency. 1043B allowed the non-federal project sponsor to carry out the construction of a project, again with the same standards as the Corps, in order to evaluate alternatives. So have you had any experience with these pilot programs, Mr. Mitamura, and are you seeing that they're taking advantage of them? Because, you know, we're going back to the 2014 WARDA, which I got to say, this committee's been pretty good on getting with the program on WARDA the last, 10 years, and getting that back is an important part of our process here. So any experience with the 1043A or B sections?
Absolutely. Allowing non-federal sponsors to take the lead on some of these studies helps not only produce more efficiency in the process, in other words, time, and cost.
Which is what we're after.
And I should add, though, that under the Corps' interpretation, reallocation studies are not allowed that same luxury. So that's why this legislation proposed by Ms. Napolitano would help with reallocation studies as well.
Yeah, I hope we can iron that out. So would it be good to extend that authority to reallocation and upgrading existing reservoirs quickly, please?
I'm sorry?
Upgrading existing reservoirs, would it be good to extend authority to that?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Ms. Norton.
I thank the chair and ranking member for holding this hearing on stakeholder priorities for the Water Resources Development Act of 2024. The District of Columbia, which I represent, is wholly reliant on the Potomac River for its drinking water, but natural or man-made events could render the river unusable for drinking water. This poses a grave risk both to the operations of the federal government and, of course, to DC residents. The federally owned and operated Washington Aqueduct produces drinking water from the Potomac River for DC and parts of Virginia, and maintains only a single day of backup water supply. To address this risk, the federal government and DC residents, I included a provision authorizing the Army Corps to conduct a feasibility study on a secondary drinking water source and additional drinking water storage capability for the District of Columbia in the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. At our last Water Resources hearing, the Deputy Chief of Engineers and Commanding General of the United States Army Corps of Engineers, Lieutenant General Spellman, indicated the Army Corps supports funding 100% of the cost of the feasibility study on a secondary drinking source and additional drinking water storage capability for the District of Columbia. Mr. Mitamora, do any other jurisdictions have multiple water sources? And do you consider it a risk to the federal government and the District of Columbia residents to have only one drinking water source and only one day of backup water supply for the nation's capital?
Absolutely. The best managed water supply sources have a diverse portfolio of sources to meet the needs of their customers. In this case, I don't know all the ins and outs of the Washington system, but I do understand that if it goes down, the city would be without water for quite a long time. So making that a priority to not only find additional water sources, but to prepare for any type of contingency would be wise. And I think Ms. Napolitano's legislation would help prioritize that type of issue within the Corps.
Thank you, and I will add that the Water Resources Development Act of 2022 also included my provisions authorizing studies of flood risk management in the Federal Triangle area of the District of Columbia and recreational access to the Potomac and Anacostia rivers. Storms in the Federal Triangle in 2018, 19, and 2020 resulted in closures of Constitution Avenue, power and transportation disruptions, and floodings of buildings. With heavy rain projected to become more frequent due to climate change, this area is increasingly susceptible to flooding. The project for flood risk management, including construction of improvements to interior drainage in the Federal Triangle, is vital to the federal government, given the many key federal assets located right there. As with the study for a secondary drinking water source, we must consider the Army Corps funding 100% of this study. DC's Clean Water Project has dramatically reduced combined sewer overflows into the Anacostia and Potomac rivers. As a result, bacterial levels are at a level that swimming in the rivers may be safe some days now and regularly in the future. The study for recreational access in the Potomac and Anacostia rivers would assess the safety of swimming in the rivers, which would benefit residents of the DC area and visitors. I yield back my time. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Ezell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Anderson, thank you for joining us today, and all our witnesses on here. It's very much appreciated that you came out here and took this opportunity. But Mr. Commissioner, I want to thank you for your prior service as a Federal Maritime Commissioner, and being a freshman member, I'm glad to learn from some of your experiences. It's clear that your past works gives you the qualifications needed to provide effective leadership at one of our nation's major seaports. Also, I believe it's obvious from your background in both the public and private sectors, you truly understand the importance of establishing the public-private partnership, or P3s, at our nation's ports. Take, for instance, the one between Ports America and the Port of Gulfport, which is in my district. Before we get into the water projects, can you expand just a little bit on the importance of the P3s and how it helps meet the demands of the maritime commerce?
Thank you, Congressman. Very important to ports is the ability to have effective public-private partnerships. I'm sure, again, my colleague at Gulfport, John Nass, would agree. Ports America is also our strategic operating terminal partner, and as such, we do co-investing on much of our port operating equipment. We have other P3s where we've had private investors invest. We'll invest in the land, they'll invest in the equipment. So we improve the bulkheads, the public use facilities. We arrange for the business contract that will allow them to be very profitable, hopefully, and bring new businesses to our port and utilize the public asset and throw off taxes, jobs, job creation. So it's critically important. I know in Gulfport, we also have mutual customers in our refrigerated produce and other products that we serve. And those in our port is a public-private partnership. So I would say they're extremely important to ports around our nation, your port and my port as well.
Thank you very much. I've got a bill which would incentivize some private investment by expanding the use of the Capital Construction Fund, or CCF, to allow port operators to upgrade their cargo handling equipment without appropriating any funds. You think this bill and similar ideas would give our ports an additional resource needed to be more efficient, provide other solutions like some of the supply chain issues that we've seen over the last couple of years?
Yes, we believe that would be very helpful for ports. The water bill expands the water side infrastructure. Your bill would allow ports to get the capital investment for the operating equipment on the land side.
Yes, thank you. Another interesting point I've noticed in your testimony in reference to the nation's 18th strategic ports, the Port of Gulfport is included in that list. I'm impressed at the work that's being done in South Mississippi to advance technology, particularly in the maritime drone industry, that will ultimately support our national security as well. These developers utilize the port's convenient access to deep and shallow water in the Gulf. And I hear from the research community that deepening the port would provide even more research benefits. Do you agree that deepening the port, such as the Port of Gulfport, would provide not only some better supply chain benefits, but also benefit our national security, such as increased R&D and training facilities?
Well, John would be very upset if I said no.
So would I.
No, I'd absolutely agree. We're at Port Tampa Bay, although we're not under one of those 18 ports. They are critical seaports to the strategic protection of our nation. Deepening those ports, along with other ports, so that we can stay competitive in the global environment is very important.
Well, you believe the military research and development, R&D, and training should be a determining factor, as well as when the Corps reviews the benefits of dredging these projects?
Beneficial dredge materials are, as I mentioned in my testimony, are going to be used, and it's really a win-win when you can use those. We like to say beneficial materials instead of spoils, because they are beneficial.
Right. Again, thank you all very much for being here today and providing us with so much information. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Malloy, again, welcome to the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I'm hearing you talk about how essential it is that we do WRDA on a 2-year cycle, and that the infrastructure is aging. And Mr. Mitamura said in his testimony that agencies focus on the missions given them from Congress. I hear from my constituents all the time how difficult the Army Corps of Engineers is to work with, because they don't hear back from them. They're not super responsive. And the Corps of Engineers website for the 2022 WRDA has almost 200 provisions from the bill on there, but only 4 of them have implementing guidance or anything tracking. I'm just wondering, for the whole panel, are you having difficulties with implementation? And if so, what can we as Congress do in the 2024 WRDA to make sure that agencies are focusing on the mission Congress has given them?
Ms. Malloy, I would say that we've been working very closely with the Corps staff on their water supply team to make sure these delays don't continue. Now, that doesn't mean we're not still seeing delays, but we think working directly with the Corps in a good faith manner has helped us to make some improvements. But across the board, I think folks would agree that it's really not a timely process. If you go back to past WRDAs, some of those provisions still have not been implemented or even have implementation guidance. And I think the Corps needs resources to do some of that. But in our case, for water supply, making it a higher priority would really help.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'll go, ma'am. I literally argued with the Army Corps of Engineers for 10 years, over a decade, on a flawed benefit-to-cost ratio at the Sioux Locks. That's why that project languished from 1986 till just the past couple of years. It was critical that we overcame that obstacle. It was critical that WRDA reauthorized it at the higher costs. But I will say, once the Army Corps got their mission orders, once WRDA authorized it, they are executing at this new Sioux Lock at an incredible rate. I have nothing but tremendous respect and appreciation for the project and the work that they're doing in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. But it took me 10 years to convince them that there was no railroad connection between the mines and the mills, and there was no alternative mode of transportation. But, you know, like a good service, they salute, and I have tremendous respect for General Spellman personally, and for the people that we work with in the Detroit District and the Buffalo District in Chicago. So it's a matter of getting the ship set on the proper course, and WRDA is the best way to do that.
Thank you.
I'll just add, similar to the other comments, you know, historically, we've heard via, you know, the Kansas City District and the Omaha District, very similar sentiments to what your constituents have shared with you. I would echo other comments, though. Most recently, communications has significantly increased and improved with both districts as well as implementation. And I mentioned the two big studies happening in our district, and I would say the Kansas City and Omaha District are doing significant public outreach on those studies. And also, I've been very open-minded to our feedback and suggestions on how to improve and make that outreach more effective. At the end of the day, we'll yet to see how constituents are listened to and how those studies come out, but we are encouraged that they are at least taking the time to kind of implement those studies in a way that they talk about the local solutions being their priority, so that's positive to hear.
Thank you.
Ms. Smalloway, the Corps has been very good and a wonderful partner to work with through our very long process. We started our project over 20 years ago, 2014. We got authorization. 2019, we got funded. The Corps was working on this very diligently and continues to work on it, but we just need the WRDA 2024 to make it a Surf City only project. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would say that the WRDA process gives the Corps the guidance that they need. That's why every 2 years is so important. You can make tweaks, improvements. Congress can direct what they want to do and doesn't let them make their own interpretations in many cases. They have improved under the 3x3x3 process. There's always room for continuous improvement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Schulten.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for taking the time today. We're coming to the end of our session, but nonetheless, these WRDA reauthorizations are of critical importance, especially for districts like mine. I represent Michigan's 3rd Congressional District in Congress, which has miles of Lake Michigan shoreline, essential for WRDA projects. Water is a way of life in West Michigan. The Great Lakes is a major economic engine both in Michigan and throughout our region. generating over $3 trillion in GDP and providing jobs for over 25 million people. Since water knows no physical boundaries, Congress must work together to ensure that we continue maintaining and caring for the vital resources of the Great Lakes for generations to come. My first question is for Mr. Weekly. As you're aware, the federal government taxes maritime cargo, and those taxes are then put into the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. In WRDA 2020, we authorized that 13% of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund should be allocated to the Great Lakes Navigation System, which includes dredging efforts that keep harbor towns such as Grand Haven and Muskegon thriving. Those are the two in my district. Can you please speak to whether those funds have indeed been used for the Great Lakes Navigation System and whether the percentage is still enough to keep up with the dredging efforts that the Corps needs to continue?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. So before we had the Great Lakes set aside, but more importantly, before the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund was opened up, Congress would only appropriate 50% of what was brought in. And that's why we got a $10 billion surplus. So those two changes have been instrumental in resuscitating the Great Lakes navigation system, particularly when we see those western Michigan ports. They're vulnerable to storm incidents, and we see a lot of littoral movement of sand and sediment. So it has been a game changer. What I worry about is the cost escalation of dredging, particularly on the Great Lakes with some of the management material. It's what I call doing less with more, doing less dredging with more dollars. What we need to do is make sure the project is more efficient. Sometimes we will not dredge, even post the 13% set aside, to 3.3 million cubic yards of sediment. More often than not, they're hitting that target, but we have seen years when they haven't, and the backlog is it's gone from $18 million, 18 million cubic yards. I believe it's probably down to the 15 million cubic yards, but I'd have to check with the Corps to get you an exact figure, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, well, you can get back to me on that. I want to continue with you just a little bit, talking about when proper dredging doesn't happen. You were referencing a little bit, but prevents vessels from being able to carry the loads that they were intended to carry. And they have to go elsewhere, and it leads to light loading. This lack of efficiency when transporting goods is also worrisome for the larger Great Lakes economy. Can you please speak to the impact it would have, economically speaking, broadly, if these lakes and river bottoms are not properly dredged?
So for each inch of lost navigation depth, we lose 270 tons of cargo. And that's just a matter of the size of our vessels. And in some instances, particularly before winter 2014, we were losing feet. So it was a significant economic loss system-wide. The worst situation I can recall is Dunkirk, New York, where the channels had gotten to the point where it was no longer economic to move cargo, so we were light loading. And the challenge there was we would do a split load, so we'd go to Tonawanda, New York, and Dunkirk. Once Dunkirk disappeared, Tonawanda was closed as a port. And that's part of my fear, particularly for some of the Ohio ports, is that if we don't dredge them, they're not going to be economical.
Thank you. That was incredibly helpful. My third question is for Mr. Mitamura. Excuse me. I understand that you helped develop a 3-state partnership between Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas to engage with the Army Corps of Engineers on water planning, management, and policy issues. Again, given that water knows no physical boundaries, can you please speak to how important it is that we engage across state lines under the WRDA authority?
Yes, thanks for the question. I was actually one of the members who initiated that process, but it no longer exists. It requires a lot of attention, coordination, but we did find results from the Corps. The districts and divisions both participated on a regular basis. So it does make a difference. Volume of voices is helpful, and Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas both benefited from that relationship. And it's still ongoing today, even though the tri-states doesn't operate anymore.
Right. Thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser and Ranking Member Napolitano. And Chairman Rouser, I hope you are working as well with Ranking Member Napolitano as she worked with me when I was Ranking Member and she was Chair, and she's got a lot of experience on WRDA. I think this is her last WRDA, so we need to make it a good one. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. We've got an issue, and you may or may not be able to address this, but it was brought to my attention by a retired colonel from the Little Rock District who made me aware of some archaic laws, and one of them happens to be with the Davis-Bacon Act, with a provision that was put in 1931 that doesn't allow or requires contractors and subcontractors performing federally funded or assisted contracts in excess of $2,000 to competitively bid the work. So they don't have any purchasing authority for anything above $2,000 without going out for bids. In practicality, that means if they have a backhoe and they need to put a new set of tires on it, they have to competitively bid it. So it takes a lot of time, ends up costing a lot of money. And this isn't about changing any kind of prevailing wage. It's just raising that limit to be able to do purchases without competitively bidding. And if you just used inflation, that would be over $30,000. It's what $2,000 was back in 1931. Not even saying we need to raise it that high, but I think we should use some common sense in that. Also, the McNamara-O'Hara Service Contract Act of 1965 requires if service on prime contracts in excess of $2,500 to pay service employees in various classes no less than the prevailing wage. And again, not to mess with the prevailing wage, but maybe look at some adjustment for inflation on that. The bottom line is I asked for a report just in the Little Rock and Tulsa districts over a 2-year time frame. These two provisions cost $18 million. Are you familiar with this happening in other areas, or do you think it would be a problem to adjust this, or a benefit to adjust it?
I'm not familiar, sir, but you sold me.
Yeah. When we're stretched for dollars and we want the dollars to actually go towards projects, it seems to be very, very common sense.
Congressman, you use common sense as part of it. I think we all agree common sense in any law makes sense, and you said it was an archaic law and no inflation adjustment or what have you, but I would say it's very similar to the challenges that we're facing with grants we receive. It's taking several years to receive those dollars, and meanwhile the projects are getting serious inflation cost added to the cost. So if there's common sense in how we deliver dollars or how we do the competitive bid, we support
Streamlining permitting would help lower costs.
Streamlining the
as
permitting
well.
would be very helpful.
A lot of opportunities to be more cost effective on our projects. Shifting gears a little bit, and again, this may be a topic you may or may not be able to address, but I got the chance to go with Ranking Member Napolitano and visit the ports in California, visit other ports across the country, and it appears to me there's a demand for more ports on the West Coast, more deepwater ports on the West Coast, and even some deepwater ports on the west coast of Alaska. But if anybody's got any knowledge to how beneficial it would be for us to build new ports to be able to move our goods, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, if you saw the West Coast ports, and Ms. Napolitano's port is a great port in Los Angeles and Long Beach, that port complex. I would be remiss if I didn't say we're here to focus on increasing and improving our existing port complexes. I can't imagine what it would require. Some of the projects, the water projects, some of our ports are facing due to excessive environmental review, lengthening the process of their GRR studies. Building a new port would seem almost impossible to me, but you know, we would strongly advocate for investing in our existing ports.
Yield back.
Mr. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Napolitano. I appreciate this opportunity to speak. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being able to make it up to Capitol Hill today to testify in front of the committee regarding the state of clean water infrastructure. Today we gather with a shared understanding of the critical importance of preserving and safeguarding our precious water resources. Among the jewels of our national heritage, the Great Lakes system and the interconnected beauty of Lake St. Clair stand as vital components of our environmental legacy. As only one of the many stewards of the Great Lakes, it is our collective responsibility to champion the protection of these majestic bodies of water, ensuring they thrive for generations to come. These interconnected bodies of water not only form the bedrock of our environmental heritage, but also serve as economic linchpins for countless communities. The nation's aging water infrastructure is in desperate need of modernization. It's going to take significant resources and our collective effort to make this happen. Mr. Weekly, you mentioned your advocacy for the SULOCs. I want to thank you. My very first bill that passed the House is H.R. 3399, the SULOC Security and Economic Report Act this summer. The DHS came out with a report in 2015 which identified the fact that due to 90% of the world's iron ore coming through the SULOCs, a shutdown for any reason would result in economic depression in the United States. And within 6 months, we lose over 11 million jobs. The economic impact to the state of Michigan would be incalculable. The SULOCs has 7,000 ships, vessels pass through annually and is widely referred to as the linchpin of the Great Lakes. I would like to speak with you about not just how the SULOCs, but as a part of the network. I'm very concerned about navigation. I do want to put this to listen. Are there any specific regulations or policies that Great Lakes carriers believe could be revised or improved to better support the Great Lakes' growth and sustainability?
That's a very difficult and broad question, sir. And I would say that I
intentionally broad because we need you to educate us. What can we go after to make the Great Lakes more clean and make it easier for economic and environmental sustainability?
So I do give the Corps a lot of credit for their executing on the SULOC project, and I thought your bill was well placed, particularly with the cyber threat. I think that's something that's under anticipated in infrastructure. Infrastructure is key. It's part of what keeps our economy moving, and I always say transportation is the grease that keeps our economy moving. I think there's opportunities to streamline some of the permitting process. I think another key is focusing on dealing with the dredge material management, particularly in some of our Lake Erie ports. There are challenges of dealing with it and complying with some of the state requirements. And as I mentioned to an earlier question, I worry about doing less with more. As the Congressman previously talked about the 1930s Act, efficiency is a big deal. We've got a $10 billion surplus, which sounds like a lot of money, but when you look at nationwide how that can be used on.
Mr. Weekly, how can we be more efficient at dredging? Just in the past few months, there's an incident, I believe, in November, there was a stuck ship carrying wheat in the Detroit River. 6 months, I think there was another one on May 17th ran aground just feet from the Belle Isle shoreline. And over, I think the Barker was carrying salt close from Milwaukee coming on this side. And we seem to have these recurring themes of ships running aground. We haven't even gotten to the point of icebreakers and winter months and navigation. Can you talk to us about how we can speed up, make the process more efficient on dredging, and then if we have time in the last minute, talk about how ice may be a factor in navigation in the Great Lakes?
So I think another way to make dredging more efficient is to broaden the dredging windows. There are challenges, particularly some of the state permits that are based, on my opinion, on some questionable science. So we need to make it more efficient so that they have a larger window with which they can use their existing capital equipment. I think what we saw in the state of Michigan is a perfect example. When the state of Michigan was paying for the dredging, the situation was so bad they were dredging recreational harbors with state money. They waived and expanded those dredging windows. So the states are more frugal with the state money than they are with federal money, and I think that's a challenge that could be addressed, sir.
Thank you. I will follow up with you offline. I appreciate your time here, sir.
I was hoping you were going to get to ice breaking. I apologize for talking too long.
Mr. Babbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. I represent the 36th District of Texas, basically Houston over to Louisiana, where we have many critical ports and waterways, really an unmatched number of chemical plants and refineries, and a number of communities that are very, very sensitive to natural disasters. We're no strangers to hurricanes. I'd like to thank all of you for your commitment to protecting and improving our nation's water resources and our infrastructure. Just like many of you in your respective roles, my district relies heavily on the Army Corps of Engineers. One key issue I hear from constituents and community leaders is on the communication with the Army Corps. My constituents pay close attention to how projects might impact their communities and quality of life. So naturally, when we're trying to help coordinate between the Army Corps and our constituents, we encourage them to leave no stone unturned and to listen very closely to their concerns. And this question is going to be open to all of you if you feel like you can answer. Do you feel like your engagements and conversations with the Army Corps are well received and heard? And when you have concerns with the way things are being done and flag these concerns with the Corps, do you feel like that your concerns result in some changes? You would like to take a stab at it. Mr. Ken?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think we have a fairly recent example of kind of how to answer that question for you. And
Sure.
As I've mentioned in the committee, we have two kind of historic generational studies happening on the Missouri River in regard to flood control as well as navigation. And those studies include a significant amount of stakeholder engagement and outreach and comment. And the Kansas City and Omaha District has done a very good job of setting up those meetings. But as you all know, I'm sure as you go talk to constituents, sometimes getting public input at a meeting it can be challenging, and getting folks to talk and give real substantive feedback can be challenging as well. And so I will say, as we observe these meetings, we've given feedback to the Corps of Engineers on how to better facilitate them, on how to break them up, have smaller meetings so individuals are willing to talk and items like that. And I will say they've been responsive to that feedback and have made adjustments and working with us to facilitate those types of discussions. And so that would be kind of my feedback and suggestion,
Okay.
is urging them to facilitate those in those ways.
Thank you very much. And as representatives in Washington, we're tasked with representing the various constituent, stakeholder, community, and advocacy groups in our home states and in our districts. And obviously, we receive a lot of requests for assistance, and I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone sitting up there where you are. We try our best to do everything we can to improve our water resources, our storm preparedness, flood resilience, et cetera. Would some of you please share some best practices for working with congressional offices? What sort of tips, suggestions, recommendations, et cetera, do you have for both other stakeholders and congressional offices working to put together strong WRDA bills? Who'd like to take a stab at that?
I'll take that, or attempt to. I think it's really important, communication. And in our case, we've probably had 20 members of Congress visit our port in the last year. It's very important for us to, we can show you slides, show you videos, but there's nothing that that beats showing somebody in person what the port is. And to that end, I'd invite any member of the committee to come down and visit in Tampa in January, where it's really nice, and we'll show you our port. I think that's really important, though, the communication aspect, and working as a team. And the Corps, going back to your previous question, many times you on this committee and our members, Mr. Webster was here earlier, has been, many members are very helpful in getting the communication to the Corps unstuck. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, and thank all of you for your service. I'm looking forward to continuing our collaboration on WRDA projects to improve our nation's water resources. With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Duarte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panel for being here today. I appreciate you being available to advise us a bit. I live in a district in the San Joaquin, I represent a district in the San Joaquin Valley of California where we were just last year and seemingly every couple decades threatened with torrential flooding. And there's been a lot of challenges in our district with siltation and channel flow capacities. It relates to, I know Mr. Mittermeier has worked on water supply issues in the past. Our channel flow actually relates directly to our water supply in that all of our reservoirs need to keep headspace in them for flood emergency events. How can we best use, and I'll start with Mr. Murder, but I'll take volunteers. Mittermeier, how can we best use this water bill to get the dredging we need executed in as near term as possible, on Army Corps time anyways, to increase our flood channel flow and hopefully increase our dam storage carryover capacities?
Yes, very good question. In the past, the Corps has probably put less focus on dredging those types of channels and making sure our reservoirs are not silting up. The state of Kansas actually took it upon themselves to do the dredging at their reservoirs because they couldn't wait for the Corps. I think the Corps is starting to pay more attention on that issue. Maybe needs a little bit more of a nudge. But in your case, the issue is so much more urgent that going directly to the Corps, to the chief, to get some attention on that. I think, I'm just assuming here, that generally that's not something that's at top of mind for the Corps.
Sure.
Unless it's at a port.
Thank you. Other input on that? Because I've got other questions. Mr. Anderson, I understand in a past life you worked for the Corn Growers Association, representing farmers. Is that the case?
No.
It's not, oh.
That
I'm
was me,
sorry.
sir.
Glad I double-checked that.
That was me, sir.
That was you. Okay, Mr. King down there. Sorry about that. I misplaced that. You did. Not an accusation. I live in California, and much of my district has what are called vernal pools. I know in many corn growing and crops areas in America, we have prairie potholes. These have been distinctly excluded from the Army Corps of Engineers jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. Do we still see the Army Corps of Engineers being distracted around the country with minor wetlands and things that are not clearly navigable waters of the United States and adjacent as defined by the recent court decisions? And how would you advise that we direct the Army Corps to focus on the many important things they could be doing that are jurisdictional and away from harassing farmers?
Yeah, as I think about this issue, we have obviously several members of our organization that are concerned about this topic, and it does continue to be a concern, especially as you think about WOTUS and that regulatory focus. I will say, and I think it was mentioned previous, as you think about directing the Corps of Engineers to focus on priority projects, passing a WRDA every 2 years is the critical tool to give them that direction and to focus them accordingly. I think as mentioned earlier, the more time that passes between WRDA bills, the more
Bring that microphone a little closer to you.
Yep. The more time that passes between WRDA bills, the more gap there is for interpretation of implementation and things like that.
In any of your expertise, thank you very much. In any of your expertise, are there specific pieces of language we can put in this WRDA bill that direct the Army Corps of Engineers away from isolated wetlands and towards the navigable waters issues that are so important to so many districts around the U.S.?
Yeah, one of our priorities in WRDA 2024 is focused on sideboards around habitat projects for the Missouri River. And so historically, these experiments within the river channel have had a significant impact on industry while not knowing whether there's a positive benefit for the species or not. And so we're very focused on increasing those sideboards to ensure that if any type of endangered species acts are happening within the river, that human interests, industry interests are strongly considered and weighed as part of that process.
Thank you. And Mr. Anderson, any quick advice you can give me on getting private operators to take care of some of the port dredging and siltation issues around the country?
In our case, we have private terminals that connect to public waterways, federal channels, and in those cases, when we do dredging projects, we will include those, can include those with tipping fees so that the revenue, because as it connects to the federal channel, up to that point has to be paid for by the private companies. And that regularly happens where we do have private terminals off the public waterways. So that's clearly a way that you can dredge non-federal channels and derive revenue from doing it to pay back the cost.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you all very much. I appreciate every single one of our panelists being here today. Very helpful and informative hearing. I see no other members that have not already been recognized before us. That being the case, this will conclude our hearing for today. And again, thank each of our witnesses for being here with us. Committee stands adjourned.